Welcome back to my inner sanctum. I'm your hostess, Countess Elizabeth, mistress of the macabre. Who loves a good mystery? I know I do, because no matter what happens, there will always be those infamous mysterious cases that will garner much attention. And today, we're going to look into a mystery a few people have requested, the Dyatlov Pass incident. Now, there have been some wild theories on this mystery, with new evidence that may explain what happened to the adventurers on that fateful day. So, let's get on our hiking boots as we climb up the Ural Mountains, so we can explore our grotesque curiosity. Here's what we know. And I apologize to those who speak Russian, for I do not. On January 23rd, 1959, 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov led a group of 8 young Soviet hikers comprising of 7 men and 2 women, and mostly university students, into the Ural Mountains, attempting to reach Mount Orton from a small settlement of Vizhai. One student with joint pain turned back, but the rest, led by Dyatlov, continued on. According to camera film and personal diaries later found at the scene by investigators, the team made camp on February 1st. This trip would be their last. It took more than 3 months to locate all 9 of their bodies in the frozen wilderness. They were found about 6 miles away from their destination, in a forest almost a mile away from their campsite, without their skis, shoes, or coats, in approximately negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit weather, or negative 34 degrees Celsius weather. 2 of them had fractured skulls, 2 or more had major chest fractures, and 1 hiker was missing her tongue. Soviet investigators listed the cause of death as a compelling natural force, and abruptly closed the case. Not even a month later. 6 of the skiers died of hypothermia, and 3 died of injuries. They died separately. 2 of them were found under a cedar tree near the remains of a fire, while 3 others were found in intervals of hundreds of feet from the tree, and 4 more were in a ravine another 250 feet away. The 2 under the tree had burned hands. The 4 in the ravine weren't found until May 4th, 3 months after the incident. The dead seemed to have donated some of their clothing items to the living. Ludmila Dubinina's foot was wrapped in a piece of Yuri Krivonishenko's pants, while Semyon Zolotarov was found wearing Dubinina's hat and coat, and some other garments had cuts in them as though they were forcibly removed. Consistently, there were 8 or 9 set of footprints in the snow, accounting for only the skiers, and not suggesting another party's involvement, at least on foot. There was no sign of struggle or any other human or animal approaching the campsite. Their campsite was made on the slope of Kholat Sayakol, or Dead Mountain, at about 3,600 feet. All the travelers, 8 of them in their early to mid-20s, with Zolyatarov in his late 30s, were experienced mountaineers, having skied across frozen lakes and totally uninhabited areas to get there. Despite nasty weather and slower progress than they would have planned, their last diary entries reflected high spirits. Charmingly, in a very typical Soviet way of bonding, they even produced a little newspaper about their trip. They titled it The Evening Otorten, of which bore the headline, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist." It goes to say, they can be met in the northern Urals, next to Otorten Mountain. They were, it is thought, probably jokingly referring to themselves. After the first 5 bodies were found, a legal inquest began, eventually determining that the cause of death was hypothermia. The deaths seemed kind of straightforward at first. Sure, these dead were in various stages of undress, including one in his underwear, but this was explained away as paradoxical undressing, which happens in about 25% of hypothermia victims, as the hypothalamus malfunctions and the body temperature seems to rise when it's really dropping. The skier's badly damaged tent, it was determined, had been cut open from the inside, and all their stuff was still in it. Why were they dead of exposure if they had access to all their winter gear before going out into the freezing winds? To all appearances, they appear to have left the tent out of their own volition and in a hurry. Bizarrely, Zolyatarov fled the camp with his camera, but not his gear, as well as Rustem Slobodin, who, along with Dyatlov and Zina Kolmogorova, seemed to have died in a pose indicating he was trying to return to the tent, had a small crack in his skull, but it was ruled that the elements had killed him, not the fracture. No external wounds were discovered. Things got really shaken up when the 4 bodies in the ravine were found and examined. Both Dubinina and Zolyatarov had fractured ribs, while Nikolai Tabobrinolis had a major skull fracture. One of the investigators compared the force required to injure a human so severely to that of a car crash. The injuries were absolutely not caused by force exerted by another human being. Once again, no soft tissue damage was observed, as though the skiers' bodies were crushed by pressure. That's the background of the case as far as cause of death for the hikers. It has also been reported that Devonina was found to be missing her tongue. Now, I'm not saying that science has 100% solved the mystery of the deaths of these hikers, or that I can solve what happened on that fateful day. But recently, as the date of this video, there has been compelling evidence as to what actually happened to the hikers. It has always been suspected that they were killed by an avalanche of sorts, but there are those that claimed, well, it couldn't have been an avalanche because the tent was still standing at the time of discovery. This is true. The tent was intact, but there is compelling evidence that it was most likely an avalanche that killed the hikers. Many argued that the avalanche theory, initially proposed in 1959, didn't seem to stack up. The team's tent encampment was cut into the snow on a slope with an incline, seemingly too mild to permit an avalanche. There was no snowfall on the night of February 1st that could have increased the weight of the snow burden on the slope and triggered a collapse. Most of the blunt force trauma injuries and some of the soft tissue damage were atypical of those caused by avalanches, whose victims usually asphyxiate. And if an avalanche had occurred, why was there a gap of at least 9 hours, according to the forensic data, between the team members cutting the slope for their encampment and the eventual avalanche? The curious delay was of particular interest to Alexander Puzrin, a geotechnical engineer at ETH Zurich, one of Switzerland's federal institutes of technology. He had recently published a paper explaining how, strange though it may seem, an earthquake can trigger an avalanche, with a gap ranging in mere minutes to several hours between the two events. The shallow slope argument against an avalanche was tackled early on. It turned out not to be all that shallow after all. The undulating topography of Kholat Syokol, covered by snowfall, made the slope appear mild, but it was actually closer to 30 degrees, the rule of thumb minimum requirement for many avalanches. Reports dating back to the site's initial investigation also described an underlying snow layer on the mountain that didn't clump together, providing a weak, slippery base that a lot of overlying snow could easily slide over. The local topography played a trick on them, says Puzrin. Then there was a question of snow mass. The cut the team made in the snow to pitch their tent destabilized the slope, but additionally, snow had to have collected before any avalanche could have happened. While weather reports record no snow on the fateful night, the Dyatlov group's diary entries note that there was strong winds, and there were likely to be katabatic winds, heavy clumps of frigid air that brought large amounts of snow from higher up down towards the campsite, increasing the load on the already precarious slope and explaining the 9-hour delay between the snow cut and avalanche. Researchers' computer simulations show the avalanche in Kholat Syokol wouldn't have been huge, perhaps involving a block of icy matter a mere 16 feet long, about the size of an SUV. The small size explains why no evidence for an avalanche was found during the initial investigation. It would have infilled the cutout campsite before quickly buried by fresh snowfall. But how could such a small collapse cause such traumatic injuries? What happened after the avalanche is speculation, but the current thinking is that the team cut themselves out of the smothered tent, freeing in a panic towards temporary shelter of the tree line, a mile downslope. 3 of them were severely injured, but everyone was found outside of the tent. So it's likely the more able-bodied survivors dragged the injured out of their smothered shelter in an attempt to rescue them. This is a story of courage and friendship, says Puzrin. Most of the 9 who perished in Kholat Syokol died of hypothermia, while others may have succumbed to their injuries. The state of undress where some were found remains puzzling. Paradoxical undressing may be an explanation, as do reports that note that some of the bodies had traces of radioactivity, which may be a result of the thorium present in camping lanterns. The missing eyes and tongue of some victims may have simply been a result of scavenging animals pecking at the dead, but this too remains open to question. The new study doesn't try to explain everything that happened back in 1959, and the Dyatlov Pass case will likely never be fully closed. This study simply offers a reasonable account of the events that ultimately triggered the deaths on Mount Orton. Well, that was truly a grotesque tale. To me, it does seem like there was an avalanche that killed the hikers that fateful day. It's tragic that these 9 people died because of an avalanche, but I've read over the evidence and the science shows that is most likely what happened to the hikers. It sure seemed more mysterious when it was UFOs or a Yeti attack, but from the injuries sustained, it's pretty certain to have been an avalanche. May their souls rest in peace. Also, if you would also like to check out my collaboration with Creepy News and check out what he has to add on the case, their link is in the description below. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe, like, and share if you would also like to keep exploring our grotesque curiosity. We will meet again in the darkness of the night.